He who fights with monsters should be careful lest he thereby become a monster. And if you gaze long into an abyss, the abyss also gazes into you. Those words, penned more than a century ago, still echo like a warning siren in our minds. What happens when the tools we pick up to protect ourselves begin to shape us? When the fight against cruelty, corruption, or chaos demands an embrace of the very darkness we vowed to extinguish. Nietzsche didn't pose this as an abstract riddle. He spoke as a prophet of the shadow within every human soul, the part of us we exile in times of peace, only to call upon in times of war. We recognize this in headlines screaming of political mobs, in whispered rumors of clandestine espionage, in the glassy eyes of statues defaced by time and anger. And we wonder, where does survival end and monstrosity begin? Is the monster simply the embodiment of evil, the cruel tyrant lording over the weak? Or could it be a radical form of liberation, an unshackling from the chains of moral conventions that bind the spirit to complacency? If morality is a fortress, Nietzsche dares us to breach its walls and confront what lies beneath. Instincts warped by fear, by ambition, by the need for power. To gaze into that internal abyss is to face a truth more unsettling than any external threat, that the capacity for monstrosity resides in each of us. The question is not whether we carry it, but how we choose to wield it. Do we let it consume our humanity, or do we see it as a catalyst for transformation? Madness, Nietzsche suggests, need not be synonymous with self-destruction. It may instead be an awakening, a severance from the herd's dulled conscience, and a step into uncharted realms of self-realization. In that crucible of chaos, the monster may emerge not purely as villain, but as an agent of profound change. So we ask ourselves, what price are we willing to pay to confront the world's monstrosities? And when we do, will we emerge stronger, our humanity tempered by darkness, or will we become what we once fought to destroy? To defeat evil, must you learn to wield it? The abyss beckons. Dare you look back? In the dizzying glare of our shared moral stage, Nietzsche saw a grand deception at work, a noble lie that binds us in chains of self-denial and envy. He called it slave morality, a value system erected by the weak to tame the strong, to sanctify meekness, pity, and self-sacrifice as virtues, and to cast ambition, pride, and ruthlessness as sins. But consider the cost of that bargain. Every code that proclaims "thou shalt not" is also a vow to conceal the instincts that drive innovation, courage, and greatness. We applaud the quiet neighbor who never challenges authority, and we shudder at the entrepreneur who dares to break molds. We elevate the powerless as paragons of virtue, while whispering that power itself is inherently corrupt. It is a curious irony. The very societies that Leoneize compassion wage crusades against their own life force. Take the Inquisition, an institution draped in the white robes of righteousness, yet burning inquisitive minds at the stake. Or look to the totalitarian regimes of the 20th century, which proclaimed equality while orchestrating mass terror. Even today, vast media empires cast themselves as bastions of truth and decency, policing discourse and branding dissenters as monsters. In each case, the moral high ground becomes a factory floor for manufacturing fear. Fear not of the tyrant waiting in the shadows, but of the tyrant within ourselves. Because if we admit the value of strength, we must also admit our own capacity for ferocity. If we acknowledge ambition as noble, we must face the dark hunger that fuels it. Our rituals of collective virtue conceal a profound terror. The terror that if we dropped our masks of goodness, we would glimpse our own monstrous potential. Nietzsche's insight cuts deeper. The true monsters are not lurking in caves or behind prison walls. They are spawned when we insist upon a single, unyielding moral narrative. By repressing desire, we create an economy of envy and resentment. The herd celebrates equality not because it is just, but because it fears that without it, the strong, for whom Nietzsche reserved the title of masters, will trample the weak. And yet, the master morality that Nietzsche championed is not hedonism unchecked, nor tyranny for its own sake. It is a celebration of creativity, individuality, and the will to power understood as self-overcoming rather than domination. When the masters forge new values, they affirm life's complexity. They do not shrink from struggle, but see it as the crucible in which the extraordinary is born. Contrast that with our modern echo chambers, platforms built on likes and shares, where conformity is rewarded and dissent erased. In this digital inquisition, moral absolutism filters the air we breathe. We are taught to recoil from any expression of confidence or pride, lest it be mistaken for cruelty. We are coaxed into believing that peace is the absence of conflict, never realizing that without the tension of opposing forces, we stagnate, petrified by our own moral complacency. So when Nietzsche warns that monsters are manufactured in the light, he means that the civilization built on slave morality forges its own executioners. It does so by ostracizing the very qualities that drive progress, then demonizing those who refuse to pretend they are meek. The true liberation, he suggests, lies in transcending both moralities, in recognizing the necessity of conscience and compassion, but also embracing strength and ambition as indispensable to human flourishing. In the mirror of modern society, we see our reflection warped. The question Nietzsche poses is as urgent today as ever. Are we content to remain docile sheep at the altar of collective virtue? Or will we dare to reclaim the raw, unvarnished power that lies dormant within us? Only by confronting the noble lie and the monsters it births can we shape a more honest, more vital humanity. What if the monsters we fear most aren't lurking in dark alleys, but were whispered into being long before we understood right from wrong? From our earliest moments, we learn which parts of ourselves deserve shame, which desires must be stifled, and which impulses are too dangerous even to name. In the playground of childhood, a single reprimand, "Don't speak up, don't take that toy, don't feel anger," can echo into a lifetime of self-suppression. Carl Jung called this buried territory our shadow self, the repository of every impulse we deem unacceptable, our envy, our rage, our forbidden longings. We build an internal cage, brick by brick, with the mortar of guilt and the stones of shame. Each lesson in obedience locks one more facet of our humanity behind iron bars. We learn to smile when we want to scream, to apologize when we feel pride, to hide our ambition beneath a cloak of modesty. But denying these aspects doesn't make us moral paragons. Instead, it fractures us. Our conscious self becomes a polished veneer, flawless but brittle, while the repressed self festers in darkness. And the monster you suppress becomes the monster you serve in silence. Because repression doesn't destroy desire, it drives it underground, where it swells in secret strength. Consider the archetype of the people pleaser, the child who mastered the art of invisibility to avoid punishment or rejection. Grown, they still wear that old survival strategy like armor, even as they bleed inside. Their worth is tethered to others' approval, and every slight becomes proof that their hidden monster is breaking free. Or think of the repressed artist, songs unwritten, sketches abandoned, stories untold, haunted by the shame of daring to dream. Creativity, once praised as a gift, becomes a liability to be caged for the sake of fitting in. Then there's the quiet man whose silence is not peace, but a pressure cooker of unmet needs. Year after year, he swallows his anger, his grief, his fear. And one day, under the weight of all he is denied, he erupts, often in ways that shock those who only saw the calm exterior. His violence is the desperate roar of the shadow self, finally unleashed. Psychologists tell us that integration, not eradication, is the path to wholeness. We must learn to face our suppressed aspects, to name them, and welcome them into the light of consciousness. Only by acknowledging our capacity for darkness can we choose how to wield it. The people pleaser can reclaim boundaries. The repressed artist can dare to create. The quiet man can channel his intensity into purpose. Nietzsche would remind us that strength is not the absence of vulnerability, but the courage to embrace it. When we unlock our internal cages, we don't unleash uncontrollable monsters. We free our full humanity. The abyss stares back, not to devour us, but to invite us home. What if the true monster isn't our repressed self, but the life we live when we pretend it doesn't exist? Only by confronting that inner beast can we learn to transform it into our most potent ally. Imagine a vast stage upon which we all perform, our roles dictated by scripts we never wrote. In hushed tones and flashing screens, an unseen cast of governments, religious orders, and media conglomerates whispers the lines we're meant to speak. They do more than govern laws or broadcast headlines. They engineer morality itself, ensuring that the most dangerous power, the power of independent thought, stays firmly out of reach. From the pulpit to the palace, moral narratives have always been the master key to the masses. A promise of eternal salvation secures the faithful. A pledge of security justifies secret armies. Whether through sermons or sound bites, the message is the same: obey, conform, and believe that power, yours or theirs, must be kept in check. Disobedience is evil. Dissent is chaos. Edward Bernays, the architect of modern propaganda, understood this deeply. In the early 20th century, he borrowed Freudian psychology to mold public opinion, transforming toothpaste into a symbol of social acceptance and war bonds into a patriotic duty. By tapping into subconscious desires, he showed that truth need not matter. Only the story you tell matters. And when you can tell that story to millions, you hold the reins of society itself. George Orwell put it another way in 1984, doublethink. The capacity to hold two contradictory beliefs at once. To worship freedom while shackled by fear. To yearn for truth while swallowing lies. Under the guise of moral urgency, governments compel citizens to embrace paradox, to see the oppressor as protector, to accept surveillance as safety. This slipperiest of psychological tools erodes resistance from within. We police our own thoughts so zealously that external censorship becomes almost superfluous. Fast forward to our digital age, and you encounter a new theater of control: cancel culture. A hashtag can brand you as villain, erasing you from the conversation without due process. The moral narrative here is efficiency. If you stray from the approved script, you are not merely wrong, you are monstrous. Fear of ostracism forces self-censorship, and before long, entire communities are trained to recite the party line in unison. Nietzsche warned us that morality is the herd instinct in the individual. When we internalize the herd's code as our own, we become both jailer and prisoner. The puppet show loses its strings, yet we dance exactly as expected. Those who dare break free, who question the narrative, who wield power in ways deemed unacceptable, are cast as villains. Paradoxically, they may be the truest agents of change. To see the system, sometimes you must step outside it. Imagine pulling back the curtain and realizing the puppeteer's hand is your own shadow. The moral compass you trusted is nothing but a magnet, drawing you away from your own center. When the badge of righteousness becomes the brand of conformity, the highest crime is authenticity. Here lies the final paradox. To free yourself from this moral machinery, you may need to become what the herd calls a monster. Not out of malice, but as an act of radical sovereignty. Choosing your own values, testing your limits, and refusing to bow before a narrative you did not author. This isn't an invitation to cruelty. It's a summons to creativity, courage, and the full embrace of your will to power. In the end, the puppet show dissolves when the puppets realize they are not props, but players. The true revolution begins not with the overthrow of external tyrants, but with the reclamation of the script itself. What lines will you write for yourself? And what kind of monster will you choose to become? When Nietzsche unveiled the idea of the Übermensch, the Overman, he was not handing the world a manifesto for tyranny, but a clarion call to radical self-creation. This figure transcends the old dichotomies of good and evil, not by denying them, but by standing so far above their battleground that their arrows fall harmlessly at his feet. The Übermensch writes his own laws, carves his own path, and dares to become a beautiful beast, part artist, part destroyer, part sovereign soul. What if morality imposed from above is nothing more than a cage of borrowed values? The Übermensch shatters that cage with the hammer of his will. He looks at the moral commandments of church and state, not as sacred tablets, but as obstacles to be overcome. With every rule he rejects, he carves space for a new direction, a new perspective, a new self. In his world, there are no inherited virtues, only those he elects by the force of his own becoming. But this transformation is not painless. To become fully oneself demands an act of self-destruction. The old identity must perish so that the new one can rise. Like the phoenix consumed by its own flame, the aspirant overman endures the agony of rebirth. He must welcome the void, confront the emptiness where the familiar once stood, and dare to leap into uncharted territory. Only then can he fashion a coherent life project from the chaos. Consider Prometheus, who stole fire from the gods and suffered eternal torment for his gift to humankind. He was branded a monster by the divine, yet his transgression ignited civilization itself. Or Lucifer, whose rebellion against imposed authority cast him out of heaven, forever the enemy of rigid order, yet symbol of enlightenment and freedom. Even Batman, society's dark guardian, operates outside the law he defends, a monstrous vigilante to some, a savior to others, but always a singular will in a world of blind conformity. These figures share a common thread. They refuse to kneel. They make enemies of the powers that be not from malice, but from conviction that higher possibilities exist. In the eyes of the herd, they are monsters. Yet their monstrosity is the seed of creativity. In their defiance, we glimpse the promise of a new humanity. To forge your own values is to stand at the edge of the abyss once more, but this time with purpose. You ask not, "What must I not do?" but "What do I will to be?" You become both sculptor and clay, molding your character by every choice, every storm weathered, every triumph and failure. Your morality is no longer a handed-down script, but a living performance, written and rewritten with each act of self-possession. And yes, you may be feared. When you reject the comforting blanket of herd morality, you threaten the security of others. Your freedom becomes a mirror, reflecting their own unexamined captivity. They call you reckless, immoral, monstrous, labels you wear as badges of honor. For in the freedom to become, you discover that monstrosity is only the shadow cast by greatness. Nietzsche's monster is not the mindless brute, but the artist of self-overcoming. He does not dominate for its own sake. He seeks the joy of creation. His territory is the space of possibility, where new values, new forms, new visions take shape. In this crucible, the monstrous and the beautiful merge into one. The beautiful beast, a testament to what humanity can become when it sheds its timid skin and embraces the full spectrum of its power. So we return to the question that haunts every seeker. If you could remake yourself from the ground up, free of fear and borrowed morals, what new constellation of values would you inscribe upon the canvas of your life? And when the world trembles at your shadow, will you shrink back into the herd? Or will you roar with the beautiful monstrosity of your own becoming? They walked among us as heroes, their names echoing through history's halls. Yet each carried a darkness that begged the question, when does conviction become cruelty and vision bleed into vengeance? Take Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr., two titans in the struggle for Black liberation. One wielded nonviolence like a torch, preaching brotherhood even in the face of hatred. The other donned the mantle of the angry black man, unapologetic in his demand for justice by any means necessary. To some, Malcolm's rhetoric was monstrous, an embrace of rage that threatened to consume. To others, King's pacifism seemed a dangerous naivete, a refusal to recognize that monsters were already at their door. In their contrasting paths, we see the dual faces of power, the gentle hand that uplifts, and the clenched fist that shatters chains. Steve Jobs, the visionary who reshaped our world with sleek devices and bold ideas, was no stranger to his own shadow. Colleagues whispered of his mercurial temper, of employees reduced to tears under his scathing critiques. Yet without that ruthless insistence on perfection, would the iPhone exist? Was his cruelty a necessary sacrifice on the altar of innovation, or the sign of a monster unwilling to suffer mediocrity? The line between genius and monstrosity blurred with every design iteration. Then there's Che Guevara, the romantic icon of rebellion. His image, beret tipped, gaze unflinching, graces posters around the globe. But behind that charismatic visage lay the architect of firing squads, the man who saw terror as a tool of revolution. For some, he is a martyr who toppled tyrants. For others, a butcher who answered dissent with death. His legacy forces us to confront a paradox. Can the same hand that liberates also destroy? History is littered with figures who slipped between hero and psychopath, depending on who told the tale. Joan of Arc was saint and heretic. Galileo was genius and heretic. The difference often lay not in their actions, but in the moral arbiters who scored their deeds. We sanitize our champions once their victories serve us, building monuments to their courage. Yet we are quick to crucify them when their rebellion bites the hand that fed them. Nietzsche would remind us that if greatness entails transcending existing values, it inevitably collides with the herd's morality. Society exalts the hero until he outgrows the herd, then demands he shed his monstrous guise or be cast aside. The monster and the visionary are two sides of the same coin. Both challenge the status quo. Both wield power that unsettles the comfortable. So where does the line fall? Perhaps it does not lie in the deeds themselves, but in our willingness to accept complexity. A visionary who embraces his darker instincts may indeed change the world, but at what cost to his humanity? And a monster who cloaks himself in righteousness may reveal truths too unsettling to ignore. In the end, the question is not whether they were heroes or psychopaths. It is what we choose to remember. Will we sanitize their darkness into legend? Or will we face the full spectrum of their humanity? Because only by doing so can we understand how close the monster and the visionary truly stand, and how easily one can become the other. In the heat of triumph, the monster within does not simply vanish. It claims its prize. Power seduces with whispers of destiny. You are chosen to reshape the world. Rebellion tastes like freedom's wine, heady and intoxicating. But with every sip, the edge grows sharper. Nietzsche's abyss beckons once more, reminding us that the darkness we unleash can devour the very soul that unleashed it. Look to history's turning points. The revolutionaries who tore down tyrants only to don their crowns. Maximilien Robespierre, once the herald of liberty, became the architect of the reign of terror, convincing himself that guillotines were the price of purity. Leon Trotsky, the purest of Bolshevik ideology, watched as Stalin's iron fist crushed the movement he helped ignite. Each believed cruelty a temporary tool, a necessary evil wielded in pursuit of a higher end. Yet the tool became the craftsman, shaping them into the very monsters they condemned. We've seen it again and again. The zealot who slaughters in the name of justice, the idealist who rationalizes torture for the sake of progress, the visionary who erases dissent to secure the future he dreams. In the flicker of candlelit councils and the roar of revolutionary crowds, moral lines blur. The mantra, ends justify the means, becomes a bridge to atrocities, each atrocity justified by a promise never fulfilled. Carl Jung echoed this peril. You don't become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. To ignore the monster's hunger is to feed it. Every act of cruelty rationalized in the name of greatness builds a monument to our own denial. The tyrant's mirror is held up to the rebel's face, and we scarcely recognize the reflection. Yet the abyss isn't a prison, it's a mirror. It offers not only a warning, but a choice. We can look into it and flinch, retreating to the safety of the herd's moral comfort. Or we can stare back and say, I see you. By naming our darkest impulses, ambition turned ruthless, rage untempered, compassion weaponized, we reclaim sovereignty over them. We learn that integration, not repression, shields us from becoming what we fight. This is the final turning point of our journey. The call to become a monster was never an unqualified endorsement of cruelty. It was an invitation to embrace the totality of our nature. But if we stop there, if we mistake the mass for the self, the transformation becomes a descent. The artist of self-creation risks becoming an automaton of destruction. So heed the warning. Power without conscience is a beast without bounds. Moral rebellion without reflection is a wildfire that consumes the forest and the soil beneath. The choice is ours to make, to wield the monster as ally, or to be consumed by it. Will you step back into the light, your darkness acknowledged, your humanity intact? Or will you let the abyss close in, until the gaze that once challenged the world becomes the world's own reflection of fear? The monster awaits your answer. So now we arrive at the precipice, where myth meets mirror, and every path winds back to the same haunting question. What does it mean to become a monster? Nietzsche never urged us to descend into mindless brutality, nor to shatter morality just for the pleasure of ruin. His vision wasn't chaos for chaos's sake, it was evolution. The Übermensch, the Overman, is not a beast unleashed, but a human transformed. Someone who walks willingly into their own darkness and emerges with eyes wide open. Throughout this journey, we've seen the lies that bind us, moral codes used to pacify, power structures built on fear, shadows we were taught to exile. We've met the monster society creates, the monsters we inherit, and the monsters we become when we forget who we are. But now, we consider the rarest figure of all, the monster with a conscience. This is not the obedient sheep, docile, deferential, shackled by duty. Nor is it the rabid predator who destroys without aim or remorse. It is something else entirely. A new kind of being, one who knows their darkness intimately, not as a flaw, but as fuel. One who integrates rage with reason, strength with sensitivity, and rebellion with purpose. This monster is dangerous, but not reckless, because power in their hands is not a weapon of dominance. It is a responsibility, a fire that can warm or burn. They are the warrior monk, disciplined in fury, serene in resolve. They are the mother who would burn the world to protect her child. They're the whistleblower who risks exile to expose truth. They're the lone artist, splashing color on the ruins, refusing to let silence win. This is what it means to evolve, not to abandon morality, but to outgrow it, to see through the illusions of imposed virtue and dare to build your own compass, to rebel not out of hatred, but from vision, to be feared, not because you seek to destroy, but because you cannot be controlled. Carl Jung warned us, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Nietzsche answered with a challenge. Shape your fate. Master your instincts. Let your shadow speak, but do not let it rule. The world doesn't need more monsters who've lost their souls, or sheep afraid to claim them. It needs those rare few who walk the middle path, those who dare to be dangerous, not to dominate, but to protect, to carve new roads where none existed, to say no when silence would be easier, to confront power, not with purity, but with principle. So we end with this. In a world built to tame you, what would it take for you to become dangerous? Not to destroy, but to protect? To rebel, not from hate, but from vision? To become a monster is to refuse the leash. To become a monster is to become whole. Fade to black.